Hello and welcome to Rough Cut Film Review. This is a review of World War Z. It's based on the book of the same name by Max Brooks. I've actually read this and I've read the zombie survival guide he wrote, and I read them both a few years ago. Brooks's prose is sometimes pretty cringeworthy and he's not a great writer. It's really remarkable how much thought he has put into what would happen if there's a zombie apocalypse and how one would go about surviving it. Really useful tips in there. So this is the film version of World War Z. It's a big summer blockbuster with the emphasis on big, starring Brad Pitt. From what I can understand, this was supposed to be released in the summer of 2012, but obviously it's just been released now. It ended up actually having its script rewritten after the film had been shot, and then it had something like 7 weeks of reshooting. So obviously the studio weren't happy or comfortable with that, and a new writer was brought in. And that's pretty unprecedented in cinema. What I can understand, the initial script was more faithful to the book than this is. The subtitle of the book is An Oral History of the Zombie War. That's the idea of it. It's lots of interviews with talking heads, imaginary talking heads, albeit. But the release version, as you can probably understand, focuses on the character played by Brad Pitt and his exploits and his experiences. So in the film we start off with Brad Pitt's character having recently quit his job as a UN investigator to become a house husband to his very bland wife and his irritating little girls in Philadelphia. There are lots of reports on the news about a new strain of rabies which is really bad around the world, but before we know what's happening, there's biting, there's running, there's car crashes, there's explosions. It's very reminiscent of the Zack Snyder remake of Dawn of the Dead, I think 2004, where you get a real sense of the chaos of what would happen. So we're off, and Pitt's character must fly around the world to look for the source of the outbreak and a potential cure to save his family. So it varies a good deal from the books, and there is a huge fundamental difference between the book and the film. If you're a horror fan, you really need to know this before you hand over your £10. Firstly, the book is a classical interpretation of zombies. That is to say, we're focused on the human reaction to external horrors, which is crucial in classical zombie stuff. It's people reacting to extreme conditions and under extreme pressures. The zombies are also Romeo-esque. They're shambling, slow-moving, they're sort of, those zombies. In the film, they are the 28 days later Danny Boyle zombies that can run and jump and smash through glass, and they're really, really angry and het up. Beyond this, I'd argue that the film is fundamentally not a zombie film. It's a disaster movie, and that's a very, very big distinction in my mind. It's got far more in common with something like Outbreak than it does Night of the Living Dead. The zombie could simply be a metaphor for a person infected with SARS who goes around infecting other people before keeling over dead. This does not have the sensibilities of a zombie film, and there seems to be little interest in the Z in the title World War Z. In fact, this doesn't feel like a war. This film should be called Outbreak of Z. Having said that, this is not a terrible film, and I do want to emphasise that. It's not a terrible film, but it's very, very average. The interest in the book was that it was looking at the global picture of a zombie outbreak, and I'm sorry, but the focus on Brad Pitt flying to Korea, Israel and Wales doesn't give us the big picture. Actually, aside from some rather stinky political subtext, what was the actual point of going, okay, well now we're in Wales, we're in a research lab in Wales. I'm afraid that physically travelling on a plane and saying, right, now we're in Azerbaijan, does not add anything or any analysis to the global consequences of attempting to resolve the outbreak. It just doesn't. To me, it looks like a film that probably had high ambition and then wimped out. It's had all its corners sanded down. Ultimately, too much money has been spent on this film to actually make it properly as the author would have intended. They have to, or at least they feel they have to, appeal to as many people as possible, and you don't do that by making a film on the global analysis of a zombie outbreak. In the book, it goes into how modern armies are defeated by the zombies. The Battle of Yonkers, as they call it, is given in detail. It goes into listing the ingredients in a root beer and saying what happens when globalization ends. You know, ingredients for the root beer come from all over the world. Ultimately, what happens when the globalized world is shut down, as well as, you know, people hiding in Canada and slowly starving to death and turning on each other as their supplies run out. Here we have Brad Pitt running from plane to plane, a customary bit of interviewing. There's a couple of characters that aren't really fleshed out that they speak to, as a bit of a nod to the book, and I wouldn't say it's any more than that, but ultimately they're there, tacked on, and all this really serves to do for me is confuse and slow down the pace. Not just geographically, but the film is all over the place for me. There's a lack of control or purpose, both in the script and the direction. The arc of the film is like a North Korean missile test. It's all over the place, which is my segue into my next point. The film also suffers from what I like to call Red Dawn, in as much as in the book the zombie outbreak originally happens in China. Here, to keep the Chinese market sweet, they've moved that to Taiwan. And watching it, it occurred to me straight away, okay, I see what you've done there, you cheeky little scaps. It's all about the bottom line. Also, I mean, there's lots of stinky politics there regarding Israel and Palestine, etc. But Brad Pitt is also given a black boss in a very thinly veiled attempt to avoid accusations of racism. So in summary, it's not a terrible film, but it's not a good one. And unfortunately, what we have up on the screen are the financial realities of Hollywood. This film is too big to fail, has to appeal to as many people as possible, but unfortunately in doing so, I'm not really sure who it's going to appeal to, because this is a zombie outbreak movie, not a zombie war film, and that's been promised in the title. Ultimately, all this film is aiming to do is hit its numbers. Perhaps it's wrong to complain about that, but artistic integrity to some is clearly a dirty word. Kind regards, Christopher Thomas.